So in terms of setup, we've got around about 450 users serving the community. We have an IT team of around 10 people, and also they look after the technical platform and that side of things. And we also have a digital team of around 4 staff that look after the content and the interface between the technology and the customer. Our accessibility journey began in 2018 with the initial publication of the EU Accessibility Directive. And like most people, we was very interested in what that was actually asking us to look at, what that meant for us and what we needed to do to address that. In terms of our website, we we wanted to understand which areas needed the greatest amount of attention and come up with a plan as to how we was going to address that, how we was going to monitor that, and how we was going to test our progress against the various different areas that we needed to look at. It's important to say that a decision that we made very early on was actually to look at all of the documents that had accumulated over the time on our website, which was giving information to citizens where that information could be served better by actually just making that information form part of our website. And that was actually one of the key decisions that we initially took. And that was great because we've been able to greatly reduce the amount of ad hoc information that was just put onto the website because it was a necessity, but it needed to be there. Our digital team act as the gateway of publication on the website, so users do not have the ability to actually self-publish. We've got an authorization and a publishing process and workflow in place, so that way we can act as gatekeepers on the content and ensure that things which are going on there and are fit for purpose and are meeting the relevant standards and requirements. On the testing side, we've used a number of different online services over time to actually do automated scans of the website, to look at key performance indicators that we want to know where we are moving to, what areas of convergence we've got and areas of divergence, if anything's cropped in under the radar. And I'm pleased to say at one point, one of the tools that we use, which is by a company called Silktide, our website was ranked number 4 on their monthly leaderboard for good practices with accessibility. So that was very pleasing. But you know that leaderboard changes every month, so it's not something that we can sit on our laurels and think actually we've got everything sorted, because it is a constantly changing landscape in terms of new information coming on and making sure onto our website and making sure that we're on top of that. I mentioned a bit about the documents. Although we decided quite early on that we didn't want as many documents on our website as we had previously, we didn't eliminate the need for having any documents on our website, and that started to become a bit of an area of concern, because whereas we had quite good tools and processes in place to monitor, all of our HTML formatting, templates on our content management system to make sure that the right things were being filled in and the right structure was in place. Documents which were being generated by end users were quite a different story. That was being done in, quite a few different styles, It was being done using the sort of native tools available in Word. If you've ever tried to understand the structure of a Word document, you know that even using the tools and thinking that you're doing things in the right way, things like tables and the formatting of various different elements can sometimes end up being a lot more complicated than they should be. And that starts to then introduce problems with accessibility, where you don't know what assistive technology the person at the other end of that document is going to be using to try and understand that document, that communication. And that was a bit of a light bulb moment for us, because we then come to think that, okay, well, you know, we can make sure that the stuff that we put on the website is actually as good as it can be. But we then started to shift our thinking about all of the other things that we actually send out to members of the public, which never actually touch the website. So, you know, all of the electronic documents that we're sending out for freedom of information requests, replies to correspondence to the council, replies as part of our complaints procedure. All of these things are end user generated documents. And actually, you know, we then realised, okay, we've been looking at the website as one part of this, but accessibility goes right beyond that and actually encompasses every area of the council that actually send out electronic documents to people. So we then started looking at actually what we could do to address that area with those two problems in mind. And the within Microsoft Word, you have got various different accessibility check-in tools. But when our digital team evaluated that, although it was surfacing a lot of problems, it wasn't necessarily giving people the right information to take action to actually correct those problems. So you had to know quite a bit about Word and how to manipulate various different elements on the page to do extra things like make sure that, you know, your tables have got titles in, make sure that your images have got descriptions and tags associated with them. And there, you know, some things where it's quite buried away in the product that you would need to find in order to address. And actually for our end users, that was going to be a problem in terms of training with the mixed skills ability that we've got across the organisation. What we didn't want to do was have gatekeepers in the same way that we've got with website content, with every other type of content which is leaving the council, because that would just be unsustainable. It's too great a volume to actually react in that way. So we then started looking at alternative products that could help us address the accessibility issues within documents. And it was that stage that we came across a product called Accessibility Fixer from Dania Software. We was already users of a product by Dania Software called Dynamic Templates, which actually assists with making sure that our templates and our corporate style is replicated across all of the communications that we send. And actually, Accessibility Fixer works in a very similar way to the inbuilt Microsoft tools, but actually then starts to suggest ways that you can fix problems rather than leave it up to end users to actually determine, you know, how they was going to fix things themselves. And that was, again, another key moment for us when we realised actually we could do things in a manageable way and actually empower users to actually correct things and make sure things were of the right standard before they was actually sent out. So we had the tools available. We had the idea as to how we wanted to go about things, but now we need to implement how we're actually going to communicate to users what the right way of doing things were. And we'd already started along the journey with our information governance teams about the organisation doing sort of pre-flight checks on documents which are sent out, primarily to make sure that things like metadata are removed, any information that you wouldn't want leaking out on hidden information within your document was completely sanitised before you released that to a member of the public. So things like, you know, removing track changes, comments and things which you didn't want other people to be privy to. So if we're asking people to actually do a pre-flight check of their documents for information governance, that would be a good opportunity to actually also say, actually, can you also incorporate as part of that process a pre-flight check for accessibility as well? And knowing that then people have got a managed workflow for actually moving through and correcting things before they get sent out was the real key ability that Accessibility Fix are provided for us. We've wrapped that up in part of a wider modernisation programme. We're quite new to Office 365, so we're quite sort of, you know, late to the game in terms of that. But it's actually given us a good opportunity in terms of looking at how people are working and the arrangements that they've got with the software on their end user devices, how software is used, how they're doing the work of the council from their new environment. And that again provided us with a good opportunity to wrap all of these elements up as part of a sort of a workforce transformation program. If we was just doing things and saying to people, right, this is the right thing to do with accessibility, and it was just on its own, then we might have had more of a battle. But actually, as making it as part of a wider program, actually, you know, we want to be conscious that we're not overloading people with too much change at one time. But if we've got the opportunity for people to look at actually how they do things and introduce new workflows, then actually doing it as part of a wider project was seen as actually quite a good idea. So it's a work in progress at the moment. That area is just being rolled out at the moment. But certainly the digital team are really getting to grips with the final documents that we are displaying on the website and making sure that those are accessible as well. I think that was probably the main points that I've got. I think we might, I don't know whether to take any questions now that people have got about our journey or whether we're actually going to do a wrap up of questions at the end.
Yeah, we'll take questions at the end for the group, but I'll just flag the one from Mark now, Darren, as it's for you specifically. About, you mentioned participants from public and private sector. Was this promoted to charities and specialist schools? So I think this was at the start when you mentioned about kind of testing with others.
Yeah, so within Kent, we've got some partnerships set up, and one of those is with a group called Smarter Digital Services, which are part of the East Kent Service Improvement Partnership, and they help and assist many councils in our area with doing their accessibility testing as part of one of their services, and they actually do engage with a number of external charities and interest groups to make sure that we're taking into account the requirements of their user groups. So that's been quite valuable because we've had access to certain pieces of software and assistive technology, which we've actually been able to run some of our web pages and templates through, and it's given us a bit of a deeper insight than maybe the sort of automated scanning robotic reporting tools have been able to give us, because that gives us a perspective actually as an end user, and actually can be quite eye-opening as well. I think it's always better if you can see if you can be in the shoes of the person which is going to be receiving that information and the actual potential problems that they might encounter, and then it gives you a better insight on actually what you need to be able to do to address that.
Great, thank you, Darren. And yes, Mark, I noticed your point. I think that would be a good one for us to discuss definitely during the Q&A, and it's something as well that I noticed while kind of putting this event on. And I think, yeah, definitely we can do better making sure that our events as well are accessible for all. Just conscious of time, so hopefully we can pick that up later. But I will now pass over to Shadi Abu Zahra from the World Wide Web Consortium, who will be sharing, how can we overcome some of the implementation pitfalls. So over to you, Shadi.
Yes, hi. Thanks a lot for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here. I have a few slides prepared just to illustrate some of what I hope to be telling you. I'm new to this group. It's good to see actually this background available. So I'm going to be talking a bit more generally. We have more time for Q&A to maybe get into some details. For those of you who don't know, W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, is an international standards organization that develops core standards for the web. So things like HTML, XML, and so on. So it's a very technical group developing those standards that people use to create websites and apps. And so it cuts across many different industry sectors and devices and interaction. The web has really morphed from a static, document-oriented media kind of really to a highly interactive, what we call the open web platform. And so a real important part of that is accessibility. And what do we actually mean by web accessibility? And I think it's important to just look at the whole picture here, because there are different parts that we need to consider in when we're making things accessible. One is really the underlying technologies. So again, things like HTML, SVG, and so on, but also non-W3C technologies. I think document formats were mentioned earlier, and many other things are kind of collectively on the web. And the important thing here is that these technologies or these formats need to support accessibility in different way. And this is a core area that we spend a lot of time on, making sure that the W3C technologies support a high level of accessibility. And so do other vendors in looking at their formats. But that's really an important thing to also consider. Which formats are you using and what level of support do they provide for accessibility? And then on this diagram is kind of the workflow. We have on the left-hand side, the developers who are using authoring tools and evaluation tools to create all the content online. I'll come back to this later, but I think that's a really, really important part here to consider. What tooling are you using? This was also mentioned just previously in the earlier presentation, is what kind of tooling are you using? That's really essential, not only to achieve accessibility, but to maintain accessibility over longer periods. And having the right tooling is an essential part that is sometimes very often overlooked. On the right-hand side, we have the users who are using browsers and media players, and also sometimes with assistive technologies that are rendering the content and displaying it to the user. And they also have an important role to play. This is maybe a different audience than directly for this for today, but it's important to keep in mind as well. Unfortunately, we spend a lot of time and effort in kind of working around also bugs and issues in these on this side of the diagram, on the browsers and media players and so on that have issues and have bugs. And in the center is really the content itself. And by content, we have a very broad definition of basically everything on the web. So to address these things, we developed the WAY guidelines, which are W3C standards, which specify accessibility. The most well-known is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and defines accessibility requirements for web content. Again, this is text, forms, graphics, video, basically everything that is on the web is considered web content. And this is also the requirements that are included in the European standard that is part of the Web Accessibility Directive, and many other policies internationally requiring web accessibility. But I'd really encourage people to also take a look at the authoring tool accessibility guidelines. This defines requirements for things like content management systems, editors, basically everything that you use to create content with. And these two standards really work very well in tandem. So when you're procuring or when you're installing or configuring, adding tools to your suite, you can look at this for guidance as well. And last but not least, just to mention for completion, we also have a standard here that specifically talks to browser vendors and media player makers. If you are developing apps, this could also be interesting because some apps render content, they're kind of miniature browsers. And so here, how to interact, how to convey accessibility information to the end user is also very relevant here. So this is maybe my first emphasis is really the authoring tools. This is one of the overlooked pitfalls, and then you spend a lot of time and effort in kind of trying to work around the tooling that you have rather than fixing the tooling. And I think the previous presentation highlighted that very well in how fixing the tooling or improving the tooling kind of enhances a lot of things. But another very big question we often get is, where do I get started? What do I do first? And as an employee of W3C, you might think I would say, W3C standards, go to the standards, it's all there. But actually I won't. So it seems that some of you here are already more advanced in the topic of accessibility, but some are still, unfortunately, still starting with accessibility. And I do not recommend actually going directly to the standards at first. This is kind of the reaction that we get when people go to the standard first, is shock and startled and just like backing off, because these standards have been written for all sorts of different context and situation. They cover many different technologies, and so they're really dense and comprehensive. They have to be very technically accurate and testable and so on. But there are many different ways of learning accessibility. And the first, and I think that's really most important, is to know your users. I think, again, this sounds really basic, but many people oversee that. When the designers and developers understand the users, understand the motivations and the use cases behind these accessibility requirements, this light bulb moment goes up. There is a motivation, there is an understanding. It makes things more human, more tangible than just some abstract standards or a set of requirements that are cryptic and unsure. So even though we're quite far along here in terms of the timeline for the Web Accessibility Directive, I know there's reporting due in September, and so there is quite some nervousness here. I do think that sometimes taking a step back a little bit and really making sure that people understand the users and the user need behind the standards can be more effective and can go forward. This is something that is often missed, and then we find very well intended attempts to finding solutions, but unfortunately things that don't really work in practice. Another thing is that we need to think beyond checklists. If you consider accessibility as a set of bugs that need to be worked off or checked off, that also very often reduces the efficiency and reduces the effectiveness, because you do need to consider accessibility as a whole and build it into the entire user experience, really bake it in to your mindset, into the DNA, I think that was said earlier. And that's, I think, a really, really important approach to really bake it in and think of it holistically together with all sorts of other requirements like usability, like corporate identity, all these things, to really build it in together. And since we're, tight on time, I will be going a bit quicker. you also need to see the accessibility throughout your project team. Very often, accessibility is kind of pushed off a little bit to the development team and becomes a developer thing. But there are many more roles that are responsible for different parts of accessibility. The content authors, most of the content comes from non-technical content authors. Again, they need the tooling, the support to help them include accessibility. But at the same time, they need to be aware, and it needs to be part of their responsibility, part of the definition of their roles and responsibilities here. So we have the icons here represent the content authors with the pen, the designers with the paintbrush. The designers here have a huge part in this. The developers with the coding, and the QA testers. And of course, in smaller organizations, sometimes a person has multiple roles, but the idea is to define, map out these roles and responsibilities and distribute that over the project team so that there's more effective implementation of accessibility throughout. And as simple as it may seem, but again, something that is very, very often overlooked, is to provide the necessary training and the skills. And thankfully, there are many, many resources outside, increasingly available, and help, basically. This is really, really important to make sure that that these people throughout the design and development process have the necessary skills to be able to accomplish their tasks and address accessibility in an adequate way. So again, here, taking a little bit of a step back and making sure you're upskilling your entire project team will, on the long run, be more effective and more sustainable way of meeting and maintaining accessibility. One of these resources that I can recommend, a little bit biased, is the WAY website, our homepage, the Web Accessibility Initiative of W3C. We have really comprehensive set of resources, including tutorials, videos, getting started tips for people who are just getting started, to kind of like have a short list of things that they can focus on, advice on testing and evaluation, resources for project management. A lot of what I was saying right now about integrating the roles and responsibilities and things like this, there are resources on planning accessibility in a project environment. And last but not least, I want to also plug here a free course that we currently have in cooperation with UNESCO, running through the end of September. I can really recommend that. It's a basic introduction to accessibility, but fairly comprehensive. So it's intended for a 4-week course, and it's completely free here, and available with international trainers from around the world, from different consultancy organizations, based on a curriculum that was developed through a W3C working group, so something that is really aligned with the standards, and is also intended for non-technical people. So it does look at the requirements and first steps in testing accessibility for those who are more technical, but at the same time provides awareness on what is accessibility, what are the user needs, the different kinds of users, business case aspects, and planning and managing as well. So this resource is another venue, possibility here to help getting training. And all these resources are freely available from our website, as I mentioned earlier. So I'll read out the URL, w3.org/WAI for Web Accessibility Initiative. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you, Shadi, for all those helpful tips and resources. That's great. And while you're talking as well, I noticed during the chat there were some points around kind of how do we get buy-in from, you know, senior leadership team, which moves over nicely. Who was the former district council, who will be able to, I guess, share, you know, experiences from his time, but also some valuable insights on, you know, how can we get that buy-in from the, you know, from the top, and will also be, sharing, you know, future tech trends and what that means for accessibility too. So over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Georgina and Shadi and Darren. I won't be too long because I know the questions will probably be a very fruitful part of the debate, but I've got sort of two contributions. Firstly, where we are now with, if you like, the regulations and where we should have been anyway, and how a chief executive or a senior leadership team should see this as part of its transformation and change management process, as Darren's outlined. And secondly, looking to the future of beyond web and how we might reduce barriers with newer technologies. Just from the first point of view, that to me, I mean, if Darren came to me and said, look, we've got a lot of technical issues with our website, I'm sure most chief execs would probably give you a couple of minutes and wonder whether, you know, he could go away and find out the solutions and come back. But it's an important technical issue, but it's also looking at it from the other side of the point. It's really a corporate issue about where your values and your standards are as an organisation. And obviously, as a local authority, you are there for everyone. You're democratically elected to support everyone, both people who have disabilities or difficulties to access services, and those who might only just have the waste bins and think the council tax is too much. Everyone's part of that community. And as Shadi says, know your users. Well, I mean, I think it's quite a salutary lesson for lots of chief execs and senior teams that perhaps we don't always know our users as well as we should. And are we using the massive data lake that we have about everyone that's signed up to being in, you know, Gravesham or Aylesbury Vale? Do we actually understand those people as people and their lives lived? And I think this accessibility issue is about really your standards and your values and your belief system is on show through your website. Websites to me seem to be like the old manual that's just committed to the web. And so as many people, even with photos and movies on it, it just takes wading through. As Darren says, you know, a lot of the materials they were producing needed to be looked at both on the web and beyond the web, because were they actually the most easy way of getting someone the information they needed in real time, even if they didn't actually understand what was being said and perhaps the material wasn't written in the most accessible way, which is where templates come in. Was it sent to the right person? Was it sent with extraneous bits of information that shouldn't have been there? So I think the whole accessibility issue for me, excuse my dogs, is to do with how you portray your values and your organizational standards through what you tell people about the information that they can get. And so it's very important that this is something that doesn't have barriers to understanding what's being said, because you want people to get access to revenues and benefits, to the waste service. Basically, you're trying to reduce the friction between this is what we've got on offer for you as a council, and this is how you can access it, and reduce the steps it takes to get what you need today in real time. And if anything, COVID has accelerated or channeled more people to the web, because, you know, maybe voice channels haven't been there because the staff have been furloughed. So it's accelerated web access and possibly even heightened the importance of how useful that information is. I remember when the first calls for universal credit came out, people who were looking to maybe never needed universal credit before, this isn't a council website, were channeled to go to the universal credit website, and people were queuing up at 3 in the morning to get their slot to get onto the web, which is really just another gate. Now, had we perhaps anticipated that in terms of how we would cope with such a lot of people being driven to webs, in the future, we'd perhaps understand the importance of speed of access and how light-footed we are to help people through the steps of getting registered on the website, understanding what's being written, having it clear, having it step through very easily. So I think chief execs and senior teams need to see this as part of how they set their corporate standards of how much do they care about their communities. To me, it's to do with all those people have contributions to make. Disability and lack of ability in visual, auditory, physical, all those things don't just sit in one community of interest, they spread across all of us. Personally, I'm colourblind, and I used to give people like Darren real grief for bringing me graphs that had a red line for this and a green line for that and a brown line for that, because I wouldn't understand which was going up and which was going down. And it used to be a bit of a laugh about, oh, the boss is upset. But what I was trying to say is I don't understand what you're telling me. And this is me, and I'm meant to understand these things. So your attitude and your belief system's on show. So yes, get all the technical things ready, but make sure that your web is giving people the best experience that they can get at one time. And that's a journey, I admit, but it's something that if you were accessing things for you, would you be raising these issues? And so I mentioned the colorblind one. It could be that you're temporarily, you've got an arm in a sling because you've got an operation on your finger and you can't use a mouse. So how would the web, allow you to still step through those things, even if you're temporarily disabled or not permanently? So basically, the web is like a digital version of a pamphlet. And as Darren says, make your written material much more easy to accept. Don't make it a kind of Shakespearean thesis. And also accept that people won't have the same level at all times, or even temporarily, the understanding of the council systems. Turn it into something that you would write for someone that like you. And this is where staff come in, because staff are a community of interest. They should reflect the population that you've got locally. And so intranets are covered by this. And has the intranet got material on it that even your own staff would find difficult to understand? Are you writing it for the sort of millennials and the Gen Zs that are being attracted to work in local authorities, who want to work with technology that they're using at home and that their customers are using? So think about your intranets as well, because the employer's experience is only as good as how they can give their customer experience. And that's something I'm sure Darren's thinking about in terms of cultural change within the organisation. So quickly, make sure it's accessible. Think of it like a book online. Would you be able to understand it? And the importance of post-COVID is it's brought more people to the table. So it's even more important that it's understood and understandable. Secondly, quickly, basically websites, as Shadi was saying, it's a way that we're building how we communicate, and it's probably quite dated. I mean, how long have they been in existence? I don't know. Even 10 years seems a long time in technology. But I think, and as Aylesbury Vale pioneered Alexa Echo with voice commands, I think voice will be increasingly another tool that overcomes the digital divide between us and our citizens. And they can call up real-time answers to real-time questions said in an empathetic and natural way. Can I get, do I have to, when is, those things can be answered. I think AI and web chat will become increasingly important, something we put web chat on the customer channel, a web chat channel, which allows automated answers to questions that have already been asked. So the agent doesn't have to answer it again. They can just authenticate that question. And it's helped a lot of people that were profoundly deaf to get answers without having to call up or get someone else to call up. I think AI generally, Internet of Things generally around the home, anything that can reduce the need to go to a website. I know we've got the current issue with the regulations, but in future I think we will be finding things that give people the answer in real time, said naturally rather than going to a book to find it. Effectively is what I think a website is, and reducing the number of forms they have to fill in to be able to populate the sort of, we know who, they know who Andrew Grant is. I'm already registered with the council. There's a My Account that knows everything about me. I want a XYZ. I want a grant. I want to receive something from you. Forms are already populated, so I don't have to fill it in again. And that form doesn't have to be checked and GDPR compliant. It knows who I am, and it's a personalised service that actually has already pre-populated most of what I need, because it knows where I live. It knows it's literally everything about me. And then for that particular episode of inquiry, I ask it, maybe through voice, maybe through a simple direct My Account type of direct access to the back office, and an answer is given in real time, rather than it being a form on the web that has to be reinterpreted and sent somewhere else. So I'll stop there and say that that's how I think some of these things will blend web with obviously the accessibility regulations met by September, but think about it as this is your attitude and your belief system on show to your public. And then if there's a democratic link to this, we vote people in because they give us services that reflect the way we live our lives now, not the way you think you should give it to us. And that's how I think good chief execs should think about it. And I think if I'd encourage people to look at it from a sort of corporate, how is it for you, customer experience point of view. And I'll end there.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Andrew. And just before we go to our discussion, just wanted to quickly pass over to Erbo Christensen from Dania Software, just to kind of give the supplier perspective, because I know you've been working with a number of councils as well on their journey to this. So if you had a few words.
Well, I have a few words. Thank you so much, Georgina. What I very much agree with the speaker's keynotes. It's interesting to say that we developed the document software together with the council, and it was actually a council, progressive council in Denmark, which came to us and said, we have those documents, we have addressed the website, we know where to go, we have the program, we have the overall plan, but now here we are, and here we have the documents, and we do not really know what to do about it, and we can't get rid of them altogether, because there will undoubtedly will be documents on the website. We'll also have communication going out to citizens that needs to be accessible. So we actually developed the tool together with users, and also taking the customers into account. And I think that plays well into what has been said already, that you need to think about the users who has to use it and make it come together. And you need to think of the customers as well in order to put together a piece of software that works well and can be used on a daily basis. And obviously, I'm not going to do any promotion here, but I'm very thankful that the Gravesham are happy with it, and it seems to be working. We preach the notion that it should be deployed broadly in the organization. We think that's the best way to go about it, so it's becoming part of the daily processes. We also like the notion that it plays well together with templates, because if you have pre-developed templates already, then it becomes so much easier to make the documents accessible. So without promoting, I can't help saying that it's a great case for us that we have managed to deploy both the dynamic template and the accessibility fixer. And there's a synergy between the two offerings. So that's all I say, and I think the name has come across from us, so I don't want to make any more promotions. Thank you so much.
No, thank you for that. So we'll go over to the questions. So feel free to put any questions in the chat or raise your hand, but I just want to pick up again on Sue Hopkins' question. So if I can address this to you, Darren, in terms of, did you have any internal kind of champions to help drive this forward? And I guess, how did you get your corporate buy-in? I know Kim also mentioned this as well. So
yeah, so in terms of internally, we've got a new chief executive at Gravesham who is very much pushing the modernisation agenda, and of course all of what we're talking about here is all wrapped up in part of that overall change programme. We have an internal change team which are part of that process as well, but actually within our elected members cohort we've also got a councillor who champions accessibility as well. He has hearing difficulties himself, so he experiences these challenges firsthand, and he really is a good person to sort of hold our feet to the fire in terms of making sure that we are actually taking into account the whole of the community, and not just those which are able to see things or read things without assistive technology.
That's great and really good to hear. I guess maybe not every public sector organisation may be in that position where they have that kind of CEO to champion. So I guess just building on what you highlighted earlier, Andrew, any kind of additional tips if you're not, I guess, in Darren's position where you've got the CEO or at the elected official level of that portfolio?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's got to be a corporate issue. I mean, if accessibility isn't important to the organisation, I don't know what is. I mean, if you turn, it's not a technical issue, though I do respect the programming issues and the technical platforms you need. And yes, it's good if a CEO or a senior leader is au fait with that, but you don't need to be to understand the importance of knowing your users and helping your users have a better day. I mean, what better political or managerial banner is that? Helping your customers have a better day tomorrow than they did today has got to be everything summed up, whether it's whatever you're doing as a council or a charity or a public sector or a housing association. You spend a lot on your communications telling everybody how great you are, but and then maybe leave this area not to be so great for obviously people have very real experiences of getting frustrated with not finding their way through the maze. So if our jobs, I mean, particularly with COVID, it's a job about the immediacy of helping people out now and using, our leadership to give people the confidence that you're leading the area in the best ways you can and to build trust. And to me, once you lose trust and confidence, you can forget anything technical or anything else. So yeah, senior leaders need to understand this. They don't have to get buried in all the technologies particularly, but they've got to empower the teams to go and be the best they can be to get this done and to stay good and to stay on top of it.
No, definitely, Angie. And I think there's an opportunity for public sector organisations as they now kind of plan for that renewal and recovery phase to kind of make sure they are kind of planning with that in mind. Question for you, Shadi, from Kim, how is WC3 enforcing legislation after September 2020?
Okay, before we get into just reflect on the prior, I fully agree with what was saying, and just to add another perspective, I think also seeing accessibility not only for the 15 or 20%, which is already significant enough, but really there are studies and research showing how accessibility benefits everyone essentially, and how it makes the interaction here between accessibility and usability. Compare that to the built environment. There's a concept of the electronic curb cut, how the curb cut doesn't only benefit wheelchair users, but people pushing a pram or luggage or whatever, all these things, everybody benefits from that, but it's essential for some people. And I think that's maybe also another argument for top level managers to get out of a bit of the stigma idea. Oh, this is, for a smaller population, oh, we don't need to, we'll worry about that later or something, but to really see this as something that is innovative, that will make the products and services much more intuitive for the majority population. Regarding that particular question, WTC doesn't enforce anything. WTC is a private organization. We develop the web standards. There are different policies and regulations. The legislators make these policies and legislations. In this particular case, I think you're referring to the Web Accessibility Directive by the European Commission, which then has been transposed into the national policies of the different member states, the different European countries. I believe after September, there's I forgot if it's every 2 or 3 years, shame on me. I think it's every 3 years that the member states have to report back to the Commission on the progress in these periods. But different member states have implemented differently. I think some member states actually have a yearly follow-up here from their so it's kind of like a pyramid. The European Commission is looking what member states are doing, and member states are actually obliged to then work with their public bodies, and what that interaction is might be a little bit different. So important here is W3C doesn't make the policies.
I think it's embedded in UK law, and even if there's a whiff of sort of Brexit and no deals it mentioned in this, sort of inferred in this question, as it's really probably imputed in the Equality Act and the Disability Discrimination Act, and also reputationally, it'd be quite a hard thing for a UK government to suddenly say this isn't really important anymore, because I don't think it's one of the early burdens on a possibly a massive recession coming. I think this would actually increase the importance, as Shadi says, of making sure that everyone's making their full contribution in all parts of society, and accessibility is just a good thing. It's like fresh air. I mean, why wouldn't you? And I don't really think once we get some of the technical things over, maybe if people started a bit late, it might be a bit of a push for them. But if they've started and they can show the UK government regulators that they're on the way and they really understand this, I think no one's going to come in and fine them, on September the 24th because they haven't done anything. But I think they've got to show willing and start trying. And as Darren says, start listening to their users, start building on the democratic legitimacy in some of their members and their leadership. So let's do this, because as you know, Shadi, you can put a big splash on your website, say how much we're fourth in the country in accessibility. It's actually a very good promotion for the organisation to say this is how they're listening.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Are there any other questions or comments before I bring this webinar to a close? No.
Well, I have only one thing.
Go ahead.
Following up on Darren, what Ed was saying is that we are aware of the fact that lawsuits has come about in the US, and there is some experts in the UK that is claiming that those lawsuits will sooner or later come to the UK. And we have had a case with Maratheftis, which is the most well-known, but there has been many other cases. So it is something which won't stop. It will only escalate. There's also been some debate on both in Scotland that you send out a document informing about COVID-19. You have done the same in Denmark, and none of those documents were accessible. And thereby you send out a document excluding 15% of the population in the respective countries. Now, this is an example of that has caused debate in both countries, and I think it's somewhat. It just shows that this needs to have attention. Oh.
Yeah, I noticed a hand up from Darren.
Yeah, one extra thing I meant to mention earlier on as well is that in terms of our website, there's a lot of it which is within our direct control, but also there's elements of it which are provided by third parties, which are also completely out of our control. And I think this is another area where we need to really look at our contracts with our suppliers, make sure when we're procuring systems which we're expecting to, plug into our websites and make available to members of the public, that we're applying the same standards to those as well that we are to other areas of our website, because from personal experience, the range of compliance amongst third parties is very varied, and actually is probably well below the standard of what you would do on your own website, and yeah, we mustn't lose sight of that. But it's something which, again, that can only really be enforced by us through our contract and procurement processes.
I want to underline procurement as something that is so important also in the hiring process, who you're hiring, and to look at the competencies here, and this is all across your staff, but also products and services that you're purchasing. All these things are really important to build around your accessibility standards.
Definitely, and I think that's why we're keen as well at techUK to host as many of these events, to hear from as many voices and bring together, I think, public sector and supply, say actually what both can we do better to create those conditions for accessibility. And we will have another forum with the Home Office, who will be kind of informing their suppliers on the issues as well that kind of Darren outlined. Well, I was just going to bring it to a close, but I just see a quick question from Shiraz. How much of a responsibility should CMS providers take in ensuring their products are compliant with the new standards technically?
Yeah, so this is you can here put the pressure on the CMS providers with your procurement choices here, and making that a demand, making them that a request. We are seeing gradual improvement in accessibility features that are offered by CMS providers. Some have really strong emphasis on this and doing a lot of work, others not. And so it's up to you to make the right selections, to make the right choices, just by whatever other purchases you make to kind of push certain agendas, so that we have more choices on accessible CMSs.
Great, thank you. And I think it goes back to that kind of standard procurement argument, and something that we at techUK always mention, kind of get that pre-market engagement, really understand who is out there and have those discussions as early as you can too. But thank you all to our attendees, to our speakers, for the generous insights and wisdom. Thank you. And I think my takeaway has been, accessibility isn't something that you do in silo, and I think, as all our speakers have mentioned, make it part of your corporate, your local local government DNA and identity. You know, what is your value? What do you want to be known for? And I think it's what we hear as well when we discuss digital transformation. You know, what's the user? What's their need? You know, working in partnership and collaborating with those across the ecosystem and your suppliers as well. So I hope it's been reassuring for everyone, some great tips that you can take back. I will be circulating the video, and also if anyone has any resources that they would like me to share as part of that, please do, and I can share yours as well, Shadi. So yeah, where, you know, we're keen to do a lot more, and I think my colleague Nimi Patel was also on this call, and she leads our work on accessibility and is working with our accessibility tech group, which I know Kim also sits on. So there'll definitely be a lot more from us, and get in touch with any ideas that you have and you'd like us to see. So leaves me to say, have a great day, everyone, and don't let the overcast weather get you down. Take care. Bye.